The biggest reason Nike buried Adidas for the last 3 decades was never the shoes. It was never the athletes, and it wasn't even the marketing budget, because for years Adidas actually spent close to the same amount. It's something way more boring, and it's something most people never notice because it doesn't live in the product at all. It lives in a decision Nike made in the 1980s that had almost nothing to do with sneakers. Because if you've ever wondered why you can recognize a Nike ad in half a second but couldn't describe the actual shoe in it to save your life, the answer doesn't start in a design lab. It starts with a decision to stop selling shoes altogether and start selling something you can't return, can't wear out, and can't compare on a spec sheet. To understand this, you have to go back to the early 1980s, when Nike was actually losing. Adidas dominated the running and soccer categories, and Nike was scrambling, mostly known for waffle-soled running shoes and a small but growing following among serious athletes. Every ad in the category looked the same: a shoe, some specs, a price, and a call to action. Cushioning percentages. Weight in ounces. Arch support diagrams. It was an entire industry competing on the same battlefield, arguing over decimal points nobody outside a lab actually understood. And Nike, at the time, was losing that argument too, because Adidas had more history, more credibility in performance engineering, and a longer track record with serious athletes. Nike couldn't win a spec sheet war it didn't have the resume to win. So in 1988, Nike did something that looked, at the time, almost reckless. They ran an ad that didn't show a single shoe feature. No cushioning claims, no technology breakdown, nothing you could compare on a chart. It just showed people running, sweating, struggling, and pushing through discomfort, with 3 words laid over the top: just do it. Meet 2 customers walking into a shoe store that same year. One is standing in front of the Adidas wall, reading the back of a box, comparing grams of foam. The other is standing in front of the Nike wall, and there's no box reading happening at all, because the decision already got made in his head before he even walked in the store. He's not buying a shoe. He's buying the version of himself that ad made him feel like for 30 seconds. And that's the entire difference. One customer is shopping. The other one already decided, and the shoe is just the receipt for a decision his emotions made for him. I actually experienced a small version of this myself a few years ago. I needed new running shoes, and I genuinely went into the store planning to compare cushioning tech, because that's supposedly the smart, rational way to buy a shoe. I stood there for maybe 90 seconds actually reading specs on an Adidas pair that, on paper, was probably the better technical shoe for what I needed. And then I picked up a Nike pair instead, and if I'm honest with myself, it wasn't because of anything printed on the box. It was because some part of my brain had decided, years earlier, watching ad after ad, that this swoosh meant something about who I was trying to be when I laced them up. I didn't buy a shoe that day. I bought an identity I'd already been sold on a decade before I ever needed running shoes. And here's my actual opinion on this, not just an observation. I think most brands still get this exact lesson backwards, even 40 years later. Companies obsess over product specs, thinking better features win markets, and features absolutely matter in a vacuum. But once a category matures and every competitor's product is genuinely good, specs stop being the deciding factor, because customers can't actually feel the difference between good and slightly better anymore. What they can feel is identity. And the brand that sells identity instead of specs isn't being lazy about the product. It's just recognizing that the real competition moved to a battlefield most companies forgot to show up to. This isn't just a personal theory, either. Marketing professor and branding researcher David Archer has written extensively about what he calls brand identity versus brand image, arguing that the strongest brands don't win by being functionally superior, they win by becoming aspirational shorthand for a feeling or a value the customer wants to associate with themselves. And Nike's own internal strategy leaned directly into this. Co-founder Phil Knight has said publicly that Nike's real business isn't shoes, it's brand, and that the company deliberately treats storytelling as more central to growth than product innovation alone. Adidas, meanwhile, spent much of the 80s and 90s still fundamentally selling performance credibility, and performance credibility is a ceiling. Identity has no ceiling, because you're not competing against other shoes anymore. You're competing against how the customer wants to see themselves, and almost nobody else is fighting that battle with you. And once a brand wins that identity battle, it changes 3 things that specs alone never could. First, it changes pricing power, because when someone buys a feeling instead of a feature, they stop comparing you to competitors on price at all. Nike could charge a premium for decades because the customer wasn't pricing a shoe, they were pricing a piece of self-image, and self-image doesn't have a competitor's price tag sitting next to it in the store. Second, it changes loyalty, because features get copied within a single product cycle, but identity compounds over years and becomes almost impossible for a competitor to reverse engineer. Adidas could copy cushioning technology in 18 months. It could not copy 30 years of just do it embedding itself into how an entire generation thought about effort and grit. And third, it changes who does your marketing for you, because when people buy identity, they don't just wear the product, they talk about it, post about it, and defend it in arguments with friends, essentially becoming unpaid brand ambassadors, which is a kind of marketing no ad budget can fully replicate. So this is really the core of it. Nike didn't beat Adidas by making a better shoe, and for long stretches, they arguably didn't. Nike beat Adidas by refusing to compete on the same battlefield everyone else was fighting on. While Adidas kept arguing about cushioning and weight, Nike quietly walked over to a completely different argument about identity, effort, and who you become when you push through discomfort, and once that argument was won, the spec sheet stopped mattering to the customer at all. And most business content still gets this story wrong, because Nike sold a feeling doesn't sound as satisfying as Nike had better marketing budgets or Nike signed better athletes, even though both of those explanations are incomplete at best. It's easier to point at a celebrity endorsement deal than to explain that the actual mechanism was a decades-long, deliberate decision to stop selling a product and start selling a self-concept. That's a harder story to tell in a headline, so most people just don't tell it, and the actual lesson gets flattened into get famous people to wear your stuff, which completely misses the point. So here's the actual question worth sitting with. Whether you run a business or you're just the person who bought sneakers you didn't technically need, are you competing on specs in a category where the real battle already moved somewhere else? Because the companies that figure that out first usually don't just win a sale. They win a decade. If you want more breakdowns like this, ones that actually explain the real mechanics behind why brands and businesses win instead of just repeating they had a good marketing team, hit subscribe, because I'll keep digging into the stuff that actually explains why things happen, not just what happened.